There are so many orchestration hack videos out there, each of them promising a trick or a tip or a shortcut to great orchestration without too much work. But which video is the right one? Which one has the best information? So what have we done to fix this information overload? Well, we've just added another one. But we can definitely promise you with absolute certainty that this one contains the best 5 orchestration hacks on the planet. Doubling instruments, the most basic concept of orchestration and the most common technique. Doubling is really simple. It's 2 or more instruments or sections of the same instrument playing the same part. There are a couple of reasons why we do this. The obvious one? Well, it sounds good. One of the most common doublings is having the flutes and violins played together. In the higher register, the addition of the flutes to the violins gives you a wonderful flowing quality to a line, and it makes the violins a bit more choir-like. It's so common, in fact, that we even have samples of the doubling, with the flutes and violins recorded in the room together. Very cool sound, but they're not limited to playing in unison. Another common doubling is having the flutes an octave above the violins. Now this really makes the violins float, but without the need for them to play at the extremes of their register. We'll give you a few more doublings. Horns and cellos is a super common combination. This combination sounds great because they blend so well in the middle of their registers. Plus, they have real weight and power if you want a melody to blast its way through the orchestra. This is another doubling that's so common that we've sampled them together. However, the combination of horns with the strings isn't just for epic music. They work really well at softer dynamics too. I've got another example here that starts with the cellos and a solo horn in unison, and then the violas and the horn section play the second half of the tune, as the violas also blend really well in their lower register with the horns. Okay, so we've seen some stuff that combines in order to really make a part stand out and give a melody or musical pattern more texture. We can take that effect one level further to create really original blends of sounds. Let's look at one of my favourite examples of this, doubling a flute, oboe and clarinet together, to melt them into some sort of woodwind hydra. What we've got here again is a patch where they've been playing sampled together, playing staccato. There are 2 parts, so we can imagine 1 flute, 1 oboe and 1 clarinet on the first part, and the second flute, second oboe and second clarinet players on the second part. It's a cool way of coming up with something different for the woodwind section. This trio of instruments doesn't need to just play rhythmic stuff though. They can also combine to play a melody in unison. They form a really fascinating blend because you can never quite tell which one is shining through. Sometimes it's a bit more flute-like, sometimes the oboe pokes out, but together they're kind of like a new instrument. What's really interesting about this combination is that they don't even have to play in unison to create this new timbral effect. Even if the flute and the oboe play in harmony or in a melody and chords together, they can still fuse together somehow. Have a listen to this example where the winds are playing a melody in parallel chords. And then, just to finish this off, we've got a doubling that isn't in our standard sections of the orchestra. Harp doubled with vibraphone. By the way, as the harp is a sort of special instrument, we have a video on it that you can check out. But let's listen to the final example for doubling before we move on. Combining the harp with a vibraphone creates a texture that has an intriguing sound. How to best describe interlocking. Interlocking is an arrangement technique. It's a way of distributing pitches across various instruments. Let's make that a bit clearer. We have different ways that we can arrange a chord. The normal way would be to distribute pitches from high to low in score order. So, in the woodwinds, that would be starting with the flutes, then the oboes, then clarinets, and then lastly bassoons. So, in this example, the highest note is on flute 1, then the next on flute 2, descending down to oboe 1, oboe 2, clarinet 1, clarinet 2, bassoon 1, and so on. But we don't have to arrange every chord or every passage like that in score order. There are 3 other ways of arranging the parts. The first is that we can literally interlock the parts of the 2 sections. So, to use a simple case of 2 flutes and 2 oboes, the order would be flute 1, oboe 1, flute 2, oboe 2. This is probably the most common way that we change the arrangement of the woodwinds, and provided we aren't picking notes that really stick out in the register of each instrument, or notes that don't sound or speak as easily, the result here is that there's not as much distinction between the 2 sections, and the chord feels more homogeneous. The second way that we can mess around with the woodwind arrangement is by enclosing one part within another. So in this case, the order would be flute 1, oboe 2, flute 2. This can work well, but again, you just have to be aware of which register you're using and whether things are sounding unbalanced as a result. And the last is very simple. It's just where one instrument overlaps with another. So in a chord, we have flute 1 on top, flute 2 below, but oboe 1 would play the same note as flute 2, and oboe 2 would be below. In an example with just these 4, you'll find that the middle tone sticks out a bit. But imagine this across the whole section, where every note of a chord is doubled up, and then there will be a bit more balance. Of course, you don't have to use these all one by one. They can all combine, so one chord could be interlocking, the next overlapping, the next enclosed, or whichever way you like. And to make the point a bit better, music isn't always just chords. You can have lines and moving parts and still make use of these principles to create interesting textures in your music. That was a short example where the bassoons enclosed the clarinets, and it has a nice choir-like feeling to it. We can look at the same melody with an interlocking example, where each instrument is less distinct and more homogeneous in texture, even when they're playing separate lines. And to finish this interlocking section off, another very common and very useful tip, the combination of French horns and bassoons. The horns are like the bridge between the woodwinds and the brass, and when you combine them, you can make bassoons sound like horns. So if you're orchestrating for 2 horns and 2 bassoons, then you don't need to worry when you need 3 or 4 notes in a chord for the horns. The bassoons will sort you out. Now, this arrangement sounds alright, but it can definitely be more creative and maybe more original. So, how can we add a bit of punch and texture to what's going on? We can do this by combining the parts with other instruments. First combination, strings and marimba together. So, the marimba there is just playing the quarter note beats of the same pattern as the violas, and it's a cool sound that beefs up and accents the strings a bit. We can do something very similar in a higher register on the violins by adding a xylophone. It's not common, and the xylophone can end up sticking out a bit if you're not careful, but something like this works really well. But that's not all I've done here. I'm sharing my personal favourite here. Low flutes, like alto flutes or bass flutes, in combination with staccato violas or violins. Adding the flutes gives you this chiffy but kind of murky addition to the strings, which is a really cool texture. Okay, one more then. It's not all about short notes or epic music. You can still have creative orchestration in soft music as well. Now, one of my favourite combinations is adding vibraphone to the starts of tremolo string notes. Tremolo strings might not always have a distinct attack, especially if you're playing softly. Adding the vibraphones gives them that attack. Dovetailing. Dovetailing is a way of joining different parts together, overlapping them in a way so that they connect up and everything flows better. Let's have a look at how you might do this on a string passage. We have an ascending figure starting in the cello, then moving to the violas, and then the violins. Each section in this example is clearly defined. The change from cello to violas and violas to violins is really obvious. But what if we want to have the impression of the whole string section doing the run, without the obvious blocks? Well, we need to overlap the starts and ends of each part. If the cello carry on for a couple of beats and then the violas start a bit earlier and so on, then they overlap much better and they blend together. Have a listen to what that's like. We can do this with sustained notes or melodic parts too. Let's look at an example on the woodwinds. Here's the part with no dovetailing. Now, the first thing that we always want to do is give some musicality to the line, and that means adding the downbeats on the final bar of each part, and just overlapping the last note with the first note of another part, like this. This has a subtle effect, but it's there. It feels connected up and it makes more sense for the musicians. If we don't want things to be so obviously a new part or a new instrument, then we can disguise things by overlapping the parts and feathering out the dovetailing. We can also do what we just did here for the strings too. Well, there you go. There are my 5 favourite orchestration tips for you. Wait, that was only 4. Well, we have been a bit sneaky here. There is a fifth tip, but only those of you who've watched this far are going to get it. And I promise you, it's a good one. Click here to watch this secret video with our fifth and final orchestration tip, and let us know in the comments what your favourite orchestration techniques are. So, see you over on the fifth hack video.